I rise to introduce the Right to Farm Bill 2019 to this place on behalf of the government. Right from the beginning, this bill has been about providing better protections for farmers and those operating agricultural enterprises. The amendment means that all of the aggravated offences, including all of the penalties, only apply to activities undertaken on agricultural land.
Have a look at the amendment file over here. There's a truckload more of amendments. No better sign than the House of Review still considers this piece of legislation to be a dud in its current form. It's still a dud. One of the ways you would fix this is actually to better fund some of the agencies that are involved in the monitoring of animal welfare. Everyone wants, particularly those of the meat eaters, we want to know that our meat has been ethically and humanely produced.
Farm terrorism is on the rise, and as it stands, there has not been adequate protections put in place. This bill should have been delivered some time ago. There are particular realities about farming. These realities are hard to stomach for ideologues and have lived at a great distance from farming. Nuisance claims are not common, and unfortunately they pale into comparison to the burgeoning threat that farmers are now facing all over Australia almost on a daily basis, and that's farm terrorism. It comes down to reality versus ideology, culture versus food. It is easy to be an animal activist and anthropomise the animals when you have absolutely no experience with animals, raising them, farming them or anything else. These terrorists are nothing more than virtual signaling elitists. That's what they are. Is it worth protesting if you don't have an account on Instagram? Probably not for these people. They believe just owning an animal equates to cruelty. They believe that an animal being killed for human consumption, by definition, is cruel. A redefinition, I might add, to the word cruelty. This is the real world. We need the meat in order to be healthy. It is too late to climb back into the tree. We have come too far. Humans have evolved as omnivores. We need meat to thrive, especially when young. There is no issue with transparency. Approach any farmer with a genuine concern and they will take you through the necessary biosecurity checks and they will show you their operation. But what hope do these farmers have when, again, simply owning an animal equates to cruelty with these terrorists? Imagine how you would feel late one night on your incredibly isolated rural property. You look out the kitchen window and you see 50-odd people dressed in ominous uniforms, wearing masks and carrying placards that incite violence against you and as they head through your farm gate. Your young children have just gone to bed, but they wake up from the chanting they hear outside the windows. What do? I have long demanded better protections for farmers. The above scenario chills me to the bone, and what is more frightening is that these terrorists suffer no repercussions. If an animal terrorist group has footage that they have recorded and it has evidence of animal cruelty on it, it should be reported immediately. Allow this animal cruelty to continue because you're trying to maximise the amount of revenue or political gain that you can make out of it in the short run. And we've just seen that in the thoroughbred racing industry.
I stand today in staunch opposition to the Right to Farm Bill 2019, or as it should really be called, the Right to Harm Bill. This bill is part of a sustained witch hunt by the government against animal advocates in New South Wales and a clear attempt to silence whistleblowers and reduce transparency. Using the term terrorism to describe peaceful protesters who are deliberately trying to get better protection for animals and transparency in a system that is fundamentally failing to protect animals is offensive. It is not just offensive to the people working to protect animals, it is offensive to the families and victims of real terrorism, who have had loved ones who have lost their lives and who have torn families apart. It is not a word to use for political point scoring, and shame on anyone who uses it for that purpose. We were provided with absolutely no evidence or statistics regarding the number of farm trespasses that have been committed by animal advocates, or that the number of trespassers is on the rise. On the other hand, we heard undisputed evidence from the New South Wales Police that the leading cause of rural trespass is illegal hunting. Illegal hunting, the #1 cause of farm trespass, has barely received a mention from the Minister throughout the entire debate and media campaign about farm trespass. It's not clear to me or the members of the Animal Justice Party why this bill affords special penalties and protection for agricultural lands and the intensive animal agriculture business industry above everyone else. The uncomfortable reality is that almost every major expose of animal cruelty in Australia has come about due to unlawful entry on an agriculture operation and obtaining undercover footage. Just last week, we saw shocking reports about the conduct of the horse racing industry. By going into slaughterhouses to capture this footage, these individuals likely breached the Enclosed Land Protection Act. And because the offence, 1, occurred on agricultural land, and 2, likely involved 2 or more people, and 3, was arguably an attempt to interfere with the business of the slaughterhouse, these amendments to the Act would see these brave people who strategically and methodically captured this footage liable to up to 3 years imprisonment. Even worse, if these individuals told someone else about the footage and encouraged them to go to the slaughterhouse to see for themselves, for example, an ABC reporter, they would be liable to another 12 months imprisonment under the new incitement offence as well. That is the thanks the government would like to give to them for exposing horrific animal cruelty and breaches to racing codes in an industry which has been deceiving the entire country. The reality is this bill will not stop animal activists from making the strategic decision to trespass onto farming property when it becomes necessary to expose the people and practices harming animals. Let's be clear, animal activists do not want to break the law. But while the government continues to ignore growing community concern about the cruel treatment of farm animals by the animal agribusiness industry, they don't have any other choice. Our laws are failing animals. Our enforcement system to uphold these weak laws are failing animals. If we had a robust, well-funded animal protection enforcement agency, rather than what we have now, which is a private charity with limited resources and powers being entrusted with enforcing criminal law, then this would severely limit the need of animal activists to intervene and expose acts of animal cruelty that are currently being ignored by enforcement agencies. It is a seriously unjust situation that someone who goes onto a slaughterhouse and captures footage of someone torturing an animal could receive a far greater punishment than the person who is actually torturing the animals. Finally, above all else, we need transparency within the animal agribusiness industry. If mandatory CCTV cameras were installed within factory farms and slaughterhouses, and this footage was made readily available online, then the public would be in a position to make informed choices on whether they think the conditions animals are farmed and slaughtered in are acceptable. Weak government does as they are told. But the more the government seeks to protect industry and allow them to hide behind these draconian laws, the more suspicious the public is becoming. Just me speaking here today is giving a voice to the animals who are suffering. It's brought their truth to light. Those who speak up for animals are becoming stronger and more resilient and more determined than ever to expose the truth. I say confidently, if this bill passes, it will still backfire. The writing is on the wall for the animal agribusiness industry and its destructive effects on animals and the environment. Compassion for animals is not going anywhere. I strongly urge everyone in this place to reject this bill.
We need to protect the role of agriculture in society and ensure farmers have a right to conduct their lawful business unhindered. This unlawful activity by vegan vigilantes and those with some form of ideological bent is on the increase. These animal rights groups are becoming more active, organised and more brazen. Can you imagine the terror of young children, Mr President, when unwelcome illegal trespassers enter their home? In the eyes of One Nation, it is akin to home invasion. It would not be tolerated in metropolitan Sydney and should not be tolerated in the bush.
You live in a piggery, sir?
So what I say is the picture that the Animal Justice Party points to in terms of the problems, in terms of animal welfare, is a misconceived view. I don't say it's a malicious view in any way. If you have an issue with regards to intensive agriculture, if you have an issue with regards to people eating meat, that's fine. You can do that. But don't do it on those people's lands. Let these people go about their lawful business without interference.
The reality is farmers very rarely have time to sit around and think about the fluffy cuteness of their lambs or the big round eyes of their calves or the playfulness of baby animals. They do not anthropomorphise animals in the way that which vegans do. They recognise that animals are just that, animals. They do not have the same mental capacity as humans. Look around us. We're in a man-made city. I do not see cows building skyscrapers. For anyone in this place that has been to an abattoir or a farm or a butcher, they will see the utmost respect and pride that farmers have for their product. Now, the opponents of this bill will tell you that these farm invasions are simply not happening. But the reality is they are. Just today, I read an article in the Daily Telegraph of a New South Wales female pig farmer who was so frightened by a farm invader in 2013 that they took out an AVO against them. The reality is that that farm invader now sits in this chamber as a member of the Animal Justice Party and wants to say that farm invasions don't happen. What a load of garbage.
Extremely distressing that anti-farm activism is increasing. Australian chicken farms have been subject to break-ins by activists who use bolt cutters to break locks and chains on gates or shed doors. Australian dairy farmers have suffered lost production and revenue from ill-informed consumers ceasing to purchase dairy products and dealing with activists invading farms.
And Conservatives are increasingly calling for firm action, usually involving stronger penalties and jail time. It's a consistent narrative from the right, who are not prepared to accept any challenge to the existing balance of power in our society. They expect compliance and obedience and the preservation of the status quo. Now, a distinction must be drawn between violent behaviour and non-violent protest. It's one thing to harm individuals and another to harm property, and these should be treated differently by the law. Jailing activists does not work. It won't work. It feeds rage and undermines confidence in the legitimacy of the law and the democratic system. There's a great divide emerging in our society between rural and urban communities, and I think it's getting wider, and bills like this exacerbate this divide. I think the current laws of trespass are adequate and proportionate, and on that basis this bill should not be supported in its current form.
It is not farmers, it is not the people who farm which the activists are targeting or concerned about. It is the practices, routine often practices, systemic practices that are part of farming, some of those practices which the activists document and take a photograph of and show the world. You may have your castle, you have a right to your castle, but your castle is not a fortress. And if there are activities which are occurring on your property, which are in question, which will no longer have a social licence, the community...
Order! I will call members to order. Every member has a right to be heard in this debate in silence.
Thank you, Mr. President. There is not one shred of evidence that any farmer has been interfered with directly or troubled or harassed or assaulted or harmed. There is not one shred of evidence that there has been a burglary, a door broken in, etc. All that these people have done is documented and published, and the world has seen what's going on. You could not get a better example as to the horse racing, as to what has happened in horse racing. All this has been going on for years. Where were the regulators? Who was taking the pictures lawfully? Who was gaining the evidence with permission? And I might point out to the Honourable Rod Roberts, it was a black woman who refused to give her seat to a young white man unlawfully, which caused a major change in that society. I would advise the government that it may regret bringing this bill on. You can't always guarantee the outcomes of what you want. The first Ag Gag bill in the United States was passed in Utah, and the first prosecution was against Amy Meyer, who stood outside an abattoir and filmed a clearly sick downer cow being picked up by a front-end loader and taken into the slaughterhouse. Prosecutors charged Meyer with trespass and illegal filming, but within 24 hours it created such a public uproar that all charges were dropped. The slaughterhouse was exposed, not just for cruel treatment of an animal, but also raised legitimate concerns about public health. The government may claim that the bill protects farmers, but what they are seeking to protect is the wall of secrecy that prevents the public from learning the truth about the daily cruelties inherent in systemic animal production systems and slaughterhouses. One has to ask why those trespassing to record evidence in animal cruelty face harsher penalties than those who commit animal cruelty offences. A maximum of 6 months jail for animal cruelty, yet a maximum of 3 years in jail for trespass. Instead of providing transparency and opening their farms to the public, the industry would rather criminalise whistleblowers. To have animal protection in the portfolio of a minister who is there to protect animal users/abusers does not fit. The portfolio of animal protection should be with the police and have nothing to do with businesses that use animals. This bill is clearly designed to prevent the exposure of animal cruelty that is on a vast scale and often perfectly lawful. Cruel but lawful, that's the issue. Procedures such as debeaking, tail docking, mulesing, castration and eye teeth removal, all without anaesthesia and pain relief, would distress most members of the public, and videos certainly can't be found on the industry websites. The Aussie Farms documentary Dominion exposed horrors such as the suffering of pigs in gas chambers and the wholesale massacre of male chicks and the fate of spent dairy cows. None of this would be known to the public without the illegal installation of cameras by trespassing activists. I would doubt very much whether the owner and manager of a property would permit the installation of cameras so that their practices could be filmed. And if they're not doing that, doesn't it beg the question, why? When the history of the animal rights movement is written, the Right to Farm Bill will rightly be seen as being amongst the last desperate attempts of animal agriculture industries to conceal the ugly truth. The truth about the abject conditions in which animals are kept in intensive industries, the truth about the routine cruelties performed on all farmed animals, and the truth about the horrors of slaughterhouses. The truth will out.
Sadly, our farmers are under increasing pressure from misguided altruistic activities from extreme activist groups. Many of these groups feel justified in committing not only acts of trespass, but also more serious criminal acts intended to interfere with an agriculture's right to engage in their business operations in safety. And we haven't even mentioned, what would happen if an activist was injured or killed? Who would be held responsible? I bet you they'd want to sue the farmers, wouldn't they? It was actually mentioned during the inquiry that some of the farmers' children who were frightened to come home. They were frightened because they didn't know if there was somebody lurking in the bushes or hiding behind a tree, or someone had broken into their homes. The Deputy President, in recent times, activist groups have become highly organised with increasing acts of aggression against farmers. Parliament will not tolerate any single person or groups of persons enforcing their opinion through acts of aggression, including unlawful trespass. Encephalopathy, mad cow disease, anthrax and other serious disease.
Mad greens disease.
Yeah, well, that's right, mad green disease. Mr. President, but it can create pain and suffering to animals. Now, I won't even. It's quite amazing how the Animal Justice Party spoke about compassion, and I'm not even going to go and talk about a bill that we had previously. Okay.
You mean the abortion bill?
Oh, thank you for the interjection. I accept that interjection.
Very helpful.
Very helpful.
Mr Deputy President, I rise on behalf of the Greens to indicate we oppose this bill that goes under the name of the Right to Farm Bill, but indeed is really all a bill about refusing transparency and criminalising protest. What this bill is intended to do, it's intended to send a chill down those brave activists, those people who are concerned about the welfare, the well-being, the lived experience of millions and millions of animals that are trapped in the industrial agriculture industry in New South Wales and have nobody to speak for them.
We have seen the Animal Justice Party in very impassioned contributions, basically threatening the right to exist of farms in New South Wales. That's how I would characterise the contribution, the right to exist, because there is an acknowledgement in their contribution that indeed farmers who undertake animal husbandry are in breach of their set of values. Farmers have a right to legally conduct a business. The right to legally conduct a business. And one should always protest within the legal view of that restriction. So the reality is, you've seen on the streets of Melbourne, on Sydney and every capital city of this country, the Extinction Rebellion protesting about climate change. I acknowledge and respect their right to protest, but I do not respect them doing it illegally. And when you do that illegally, you cross the line. We're talking about a small group of people who are basically exercising their right of protest because they disagree, irrespective of whether or not it's legal. They disagree because their view is right, and they don't care about whether or not the actual activity has been legally sanctioned or not. Vigilante vegans who go onto properties and decide that it is their right to impose their views on other people, regardless of what the legality of the situation is. All we want on this side of the chamber is people to obey the law. Obey the law of protesting. Take responsibility for your actions. And at the end of the day, understand that if you don't and you cross the line, you're walking into a situation where anything can happen, because people have a right to protect their property and their family. These legal businesses have a right to exist, which I know strikes at the heart and the passion of those in the Animal Justice Party. The reality is they are completely out of touch with the great mainstream views of our society. People just want to get on with their lives. They want to get on with their businesses, and they don't want to have people illegally obstructing them from what they should be able to legally do and should be protected to legally do. And that's at the heart of this bill. And I commend it to this House, and I thank this government for finally sticking up for farmers, because frankly it's long overdue.
There is nothing more hypocritical than city slickers telling those that supply the food and fibre of our nation how they should do that. There is nothing more hypocritical. We will not be lectured to by those opposite, those who have no experience in rural and regional communities, other than potentially breaking into farms and terrorising those that live there. Those who work on the land love their land. They love their animals and they love their families.
And I recognise that some farming practices, they are abhorrent to many. And regardless of whether or not they've been practiced for a really long time, that is no reason to continue those practices. They need to farm in a way that reflects what is socially acceptable. You don't just get to do what you want on your private land, whether it's your house, your unit, whether it's your business or whether it's your farm. We work inside a social context. You have to be able to work within what is politically acceptable, socially acceptable, whether that's in how you pay your workers, whether that's in how you use your water, or whether that's how you treat your livestock. Regardless of what law passes here today, Communities' expectations are changing and farmers are going to need to adapt to that.
I sit here and listen to people who know nothing about farming, some of whom have never even entered a property, from what I'm hearing, telling us that there are good farmers and bad farmers and that, you know, some of them love their animals, and giving this impression that there's this widespread torture of animals going across the state, and that the only way to change this is to have animal welfare nutcases go onto people's properties illegally and film them, and finally we're going to, you know, through revealing. This is absolute nonsense. And farming practices, guess what? They're different today than they were 200 years ago. And we haven't had animal activists for 200 years telling them what to do and that's why it's changed. No. Farming practices have evolved because of farmers and veterinarians and people who know their stuff, because they love their animals. Look, I grew up on a farm, and farm animals are bred for a productive purpose and they're consumed. It's a business, of course, and there is a bit of a trick not to get too fond of too many animals, because ultimately, you know, you've got the feedlot, you've got the steers, and they're being bred for slaughter. So it needs to be done in a humane way and a thoughtful way, and we're always very grateful to animals and the return that they gave to the families on our property.
Unfortunately, often there are bad laws, and if it wasn't for people protesting illegally, women wouldn't have the vote. There's a number of very, very important social reforms that occur only because people are willing to break the law. And in the context of animal welfare in particular, we are seeing an unprecedented move by community towards understanding animal rights issues much better. This bill and the arguments put forward by the government and those supporting this bill have been so extreme and out of proportion and based on such misinformation that it seems as though someone has been reading to us the front page of the Daily Telegraph. And the Daily Telegraph is not a good source of information on which to base new laws.
Despite what the National Party will tell you, the greatest risk to our farmers is not vegan activists. It's climate change, it's urbanisation, it's land security, it's the monopoly of the supermarket chains who squeeze prices to breaking point. This government has an unfortunate track record of skirting around these real and fundamental issues. This legislation tries to blame farmers' problems on protesters and activists. I mean, last month, the Federal Council of the National Party decided that cracking down on almond and soy milk, being called milk, was a national priority. Not the drought, not climate change, not biodiversity loss, not our stalling economy or water or the future of our rivers, but almond milk.
Mr President, our farmers need our support on this. I close in saying I hope the saner minds within Labor prevail and rally to support this piece of legislation. I commend this bill to the House.
There being 18 ayes and 17 noes, the question is resolved in the affirmative. Unlock the doors. Clerk.
Right to farm.